When I was 64, my daughter sold my medical practice out from under me, emptied the joint account I had trusted her to manage while I was in the hospital, and left a cashier's check for $275 on the kitchen counter. Tucked under it was a post-it note in her handwriting. "For your fresh start, Dad. We love you." 14 years later, my granddaughter was up past midnight working on a paper about rural healthcare access when she typed my name into a search bar. The Wall Street Journal profile loaded on the first result. She called me sobbing from her dorm room. By 7 the next morning, I had 47 missed calls from every phone number connected to my daughter. I did not answer a single one. Before I tell you what I did instead, drop your location in the comments. And if you have ever had someone use your most broken moment as a door they walked right through, hit like. You will understand everything I am about to say. The phone on my end table had been lighting up since early morning. I was sitting in the reading chair by the front window of my house. Not a glass penthouse or a sprawling estate, but a modest 2-bedroom on 3 quiet acres outside of Cookeville, Tennessee. The kind of house where the front porch sags slightly on the left side, and the neighbor's barn cats wander over most afternoons without being invited. Not the kind of place you would expect to find someone described in a national newspaper as a quiet architect of rural American medicine. But that is the thing about building a life in secret. You get to choose exactly what it looks like. I picked up the phone and checked the screen. 47 missed calls, then 49, then 52. I set it back down. I thought about who I was 14 years before. 64 years old, a widower of 9 months, and the sole owner of Alcott Orthopedic Associates in Brentwood, Tennessee, a practice I had built one patient at a time since 1979. 31 years of surgeries and follow-ups and late-night calls, and more malpractice insurance payments than I care to remember. My wife Harriet and I had built everything together. She kept the books, managed the front desk staff, drove me home from the hospital on the nights I was too exhausted to trust myself behind the wheel. When the pancreatic cancer took her in 14 months, it went fast enough that I never fully believed it was happening until it was already over. I was not in a good place. Anyone who has buried a partner of 37 years will understand that what follows is not exactly grief. It is more like the floor has simply been removed and you keep reaching for things that are no longer there. My daughter stepped in. That was how she framed it, stepping in. She and her husband had moved back to Tennessee from Phoenix the year before, claiming they wanted to be closer to family. I understand now that the actual calculation was quite different, but at the time I was grateful. I was also, in the months following Harriet's death, recovering from a transient ischemic attack, a minor stroke, the kind that leaves your thoughts a few beats slower, your signature slightly shakier, your ability to read long documents for any sustained period genuinely compromised. She came to the house one Tuesday morning in October with a large mug of decaf and a manila envelope. She sat across the kitchen table from me and told me the documents inside were insurance continuity forms, Medicare provider documentation, routine paperwork that needed my signature to keep the practice running without interruption while I recovered. She was calm and organized and patient. She was my daughter. I trusted her completely. I signed 9 pages without reading a single line. I came home from a cardiology follow-up at Vanderbilt 3 weeks later to find the locks on my front door had been changed. A locksmith's notice was taped to the storm door. In the mailbox was the cashier's check and the post-it note. What I had actually signed, I eventually learned, was a general power of attorney, a real property transfer deed for the house, and the sale authorization for my medical practice. They had sold the practice to a hospital group for $890,000. They had transferred the house and immediately leveraged it for a home equity line of credit. They had withdrawn every dollar from the joint household account. Harriet and I had maintained for 30 years, $312,000, and closed it the same afternoon. They left me $275 and told me they loved me. I slept in a comfort inn in Murfreesboro for 11 weeks. I had my Social Security, my Medicare card, and a box of Harriet's books I had managed to retrieve before the locks were changed. I am not going to pretend those weeks were anything other than what they were. I sat in that motel room and I thought about every choice I had made, every trust I had extended, and I arrived at a very specific and clarifying kind of anger. Not the hot kind that burns itself out, but the cold, quiet kind that calcifies over time into something useful. I started writing. I had 31 years of medicine inside me, stories I had never told anyone, cases that had humbled me, patients who had changed how I understood what it meant to be alive. I wrote a memoir, longhand first, in composition notebooks I bought at the dollar store, then typed on a second-hand laptop at the Murfreesboro Public Library. I used a pen name, R.A. Dunmore, published it through a small independent press in Nashville. It moved slowly at first, and then a book club picked it up, and then NPR did a segment, and then the New York Times reviewed it on a Sunday, and then it did not move slowly anymore. I did not spend the money on myself. Every cent went into a nonprofit I registered quietly, the Dunmore Rural Health Initiative. Within 8 years, we had 22 free clinics operating across rural Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, staffed by volunteer physicians and paid clinicians, serving people who had never in their adult lives been able to see a doctor without going into debt. 14 years after the Post-it note told me to start fresh, I was doing exactly that. I was also entirely unreachable by anyone who had known me before, until my granddaughter found me. The phone rang at 11:17 p.m. on a Thursday in October. I picked it up without checking the number. My granddaughter's voice came through before I even said hello. Broken, breathless, unmistakable. Grandpa. I had not heard that word in 14 years. She had been 7 the last time I saw her. She was 21 now, a junior at the University of Kentucky, pre-med. I knew this not because we had been in contact, but because I had watched her from a careful distance, the way you watch something fragile that you cannot afford to startle. Grandpa, please don't hang up. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of it. I sat very still and let her talk. She told me she was writing a paper for her health policy seminar, a study on nonprofit medical expansion in underserved Appalachian communities. She had found a reference to the Dunmore clinics in an academic database, pulled up the Wall Street Journal profile published 6 months earlier, and stared at my photograph for a long time before she understood what she was looking at. They told me you abandoned us after Grandma died, she said. They said you started drinking, that you gave the practice away to cover debts you had hidden from the family. They said you didn't want contact, that you were ashamed. I let out a slow breath. I was not surprised. I was something past surprise, something quieter, more settled. None of that is true, I said. She already knew. She had read the article 3 times. She had found the county deed records online. She was a pre-med student who understood documents and dates, and the specific arithmetic of betrayal. What did they do to you? She whispered. Before I could answer, I heard footsteps on a hard floor, a door thrown open, and my granddaughter's voice cut off mid-breath. A brief struggle. The phone changed hands. Jerome. My son-in-law's voice came through tightly controlled but barely. Jerome, is that really you? We have been trying to reach you for years. There has been a terrible misunderstanding about what happened with the practice, and I need you to hear me out. My company is in serious trouble, and when our daughter showed us that article, Jerome, we are family. You have to give me a chance. He used the word family 4 more times in 30 seconds. He did not use the word sorry once. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. He called back immediately. I watched it ring. The first move was his. The next one belonged entirely to me. Hit subscribe before you keep reading. This is only the beginning. I had not been idle during 14 years of silence, and I had not spent them feeling sorry for myself, though I had certainly earned the right. What I had done was build something, and in building it, I had hired someone who knew precisely how to dismantle people like my son-in-law. Prescott had been my legal counsel for 6 years. A colleague described him accurately as the kind of attorney who made opposing counsel feel genuinely afraid. He was methodical and soft-spoken, and entirely without sentimentality. 2 days after the missed calls began, I sat across from him in his Nashville office and told him to start digging. He called me back in 4 days. He set a thick accordion file on the conference table between us and told me he had not just dug, he had brought in a forensic accounting team. My son-in-law's construction company was not experiencing a market downturn. It was disintegrating. For several years, he had been overbilling federal contracts on Department of Transportation infrastructure projects across 3 states, inflating material costs, billing for labor hours that were never worked, routing the excess through a network of shell subcontractors back into personal accounts. The forensic audit put the total at approximately $3.4 million in fraudulent billing. What made it almost elegant in its stupidity was this. A federal oversight contractor had flagged the discrepancies 18 months earlier. There was already a quiet federal investigation underway. My son-in-law knew it. That was why he needed money. Not to save his business. To plug the hole before investigators kicked his door in. He thought I was going to hand him $1.5 million and ask no questions. He thought I was still the medicated, grieving old man who had signed 9 pages without reading them. I called him and told him I was ready to discuss the matter. I gave him the address of the Foundation's Nashville offices and told him to come with my daughter. He arrived looking like a man who had already spent the money. My daughter sat across the table and folded her hands in the practiced manner of someone who has decided to be gracious about a problem they believe is already solved. There was no apology. She said she was glad we were finally having this conversation. She said she had always worried about me. She said the decisions they had made were made out of love, out of concern, because they were afraid of what I might do to myself if they had not intervened. I let her finish. My son-in-law pushed a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal for a $1.5 million loan to restructure his company's outstanding liabilities. I looked at the folder. I looked at my daughter. I looked at my son-in-law. I let the silence stretch for a full 10 seconds, long enough that I could see the slight relaxation in his shoulders, the body language of a man who believes he has already won. Then I told them that my foundation was hosting its annual benefit gala in 2 weeks at the Hermitage Hotel in downtown Nashville. I said every major donor, board member, and healthcare journalist I worked with would be in attendance. I told them I planned to make a significant public announcement about the foundation's future leadership and endowment. I said I wanted them there, and that everything would be made clear that evening. My son-in-law looked at my daughter. Something hot and calculating passed between them. He asked about the $1.5 million. I told him he would have his answer at the gala. They left believing they had already won. I could see it in the way my son-in-law's posture changed as he walked out. The slight expansion of the chest, the slower stride of a man mentally redecorating a future he had not yet earned. The bait was taken, the trap was set. 3 days before the gala, I sat across from my granddaughter in a coffee shop near Vanderbilt. She had driven down from Lexington and looked tired in the way young people look tired when they are carrying information too heavy for them. Not from lack of sleep, but from too much truth arriving too quickly. I placed a small USB drive on the table between us. I told her what was on it: the forensic audit, the federal billing records, the shell company registrations, 14 years of financial fraud compressed into 47 files. She stared at the drive for a long time without touching it. I told her about the gala. I told her that near the service entrance, she would find a man in a charcoal blazer standing alone. I told her to hand him the drive. She asked me who he was. I told her that her parents had made every significant decision of her life for her. They had chosen what she believed, who she trusted, and what version of her grandfather she was allowed to have. In 2 weeks, I said, the choice was hers alone to make. She could walk away and stand with the people who had built their lives on a lie, or she could deliver the drive and stand with something that would outlast all of us. She reached out and wrapped her fingers around the drive. She held it tight. She gave me one slow, definitive nod. The Hermitage Hotel ballroom was exactly as I remembered it. Coffered ceilings, amber light, the kind of room that makes people feel important regardless of whether they have earned that feeling. By the time I arrived, my daughter and her husband were already working the room. I watched from the curved mezzanine above. My daughter moved through the crowd with the easy authority of someone who believes she is inheriting a kingdom. My son-in-law had cornered 2 healthcare journalists near the bar and was talking about legacy, about responsibility, about the importance of keeping institutions within the family. He had the practiced cadence of a man who had been rehearsing this performance for 2 weeks. A reporter from a local business publication looked up and spotted me on the mezzanine. The murmur in the room shifted. My son-in-law turned, found my face in the shadows, and lifted his chin at me in a gesture that was meant to look like deference and looked exactly like what it was: a man marking territory he did not own. I walked down to the main floor and stepped up to the podium. The spotlights found me instantly. The room quieted. I looked out over the crowd, the donors who had believed in this work, the clinicians who had volunteered their time, the journalists with their phones already raised. And at the very front, pressed close to the stage, my daughter and her husband, both leaning forward, both wearing the careful, hungry expression of people who believe they already know the ending. I let the silence gather until it had real weight. 14 years ago, I said, my voice steady and unhurried, I was a 64-year-old widower recovering from a minor stroke in a Murfreesboro motel room with $275 to my name. A murmur moved through the room. I told them about 31 years of medicine. I told them about Harriet. I told them, without embellishment, about the Tuesday morning my daughter brought documents for me to sign, about coming home 3 weeks later to change locks and a cashier's check on the kitchen counter. I told them exactly what I had signed away without knowing it, a power of attorney, a deed transfer, a practice authorization, and how I had eventually found all of it documented in county records that anyone with an internet connection could pull up today. I watched my daughter's color drain in real time. I reached into my jacket pocket and produced a laminated card. On the screen behind me, a photograph appeared, a wrinkled yellow post-it note I had photographed in that Murfreesboro motel room 14 years ago, when I still had the presence of mind to document everything. For your fresh start, Dad, we love you. The room went completely still. That note, I said, is the reason this foundation exists. $275 was the value placed on 31 years of my life's work, so I took that number and I built something with it. Tonight I am formally announcing the expansion of our network into 12 additional counties across rural Appalachia, to be known as the 275 clinics, named for the exact amount I was left with, because I want every person who walks through those doors to know that you can be discarded by the people closest to you and still build something that outlasts them. I looked directly at my son-in-law. I also want to be entirely clear about the future of this foundation's leadership. There are no family heirs. There are no inheritance provisions. Not $1 of this endowment will ever pass to my daughter or her husband. What I have built belongs to the forgotten and the discarded, because I know exactly what it feels like to be both. The room erupted into the charged, disorganized sound of a crowd processing something it did not anticipate. My son-in-law was through the crowd and at the velvet rope before the echo faded. His face had gone a dark, suffocating red. He grabbed the rope with both hands and told me, loudly, on record, in front of every camera in the room, that I was a vindictive old man who had lost his mind, that I had no right to stand there rewriting history, that the foundation would be contested in court before the night was over. Then the service doors at the back of the ballroom opened. My granddaughter walked in. She did not look like the exhausted young woman who had sat across from me in a coffee shop 3 days earlier. She walked down the center of that ballroom with her chin up and her shoulders squared, and the crowd parted for her without her asking. She stepped over the velvet rope, walked past her mother without a glance, and stopped directly in front of her father. He told her to leave. He told her she did not understand what was happening. He used a tone of voice that must have worked on her for her entire childhood. She took a microphone from a stunned journalist standing nearby. "My name is Zoe," she said, and her voice came through the speakers clean and steady. "I am this man's granddaughter. I am a third-year pre-med student, and I know how to read a property deed." She turned to face the audience. "Everything he said is true. I verified it myself using public county records that have been sitting in a database for 14 years. My parents transferred his house, sold his practice, and drained his accounts while he was recovering from a stroke 9 months after losing his wife. And my father is also currently the subject of a federal investigation for contractor fraud. I delivered the evidence to a federal agent 30 minutes ago. You can ask him directly." She gestured toward the service entrance. 3 men in charcoal blazers were already moving down the center aisle. My son-in-law did not wait. He closed the distance to his daughter in 2 long strides with his hand raised. He did not reach her. I stepped between them. "I am 78 years old. People tend to underestimate what 78 feels like when you have spent decades with the hand-eye coordination of a surgeon and the particular stubbornness of a man who has already lost everything once and has no intention of losing again. I caught his forearm with both hands and drove him backward into the chest of a hotel security officer who was already moving in from the left. The security team had him in 30 seconds. He was still shouting. He was calling me things I will not repeat. He was telling his daughter she was dead to him. Zoe did not flinch. She looked at the journalists, all of whom now had their phones raised, and she did not say another word. She had already said everything. The federal agents moved through the crowd with the unhurried precision of people who have done this many times before. The lead agent stepped onto the stage, looked at my son-in-law pinned to the floor, and read the charges in a clear, carrying voice. Wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the federal government, elder financial abuse, the last charge courtesy of 14 years of meticulous documentation filed by my attorney 6 months prior. My son-in-law stopped fighting. The sound left him all at once, like air going out of a tire, and he lay very still while the cuffs clicked into place. My daughter had not moved. She stood at the edge of the stage, with one hand pressed flat against her sternum, as though she were physically holding herself together. When she finally understood that there was nothing left to hold, no inheritance, no position, no escape from the federal net already tightening around them, she turned to me. She grabbed the sleeve of my jacket with both hands. The tears were real this time, not the practiced kind, the ugly kind with nothing behind it, but the full and final understanding of what she had thrown away. She called me Dad. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said they could return the money, explain everything, fix it all, if I would just tell the agents to wait. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I peeled her hands from my sleeve, gently but completely, and I said the 6 words that had been waiting 14 years to be returned to their rightful owner. You'll figure it out, I told her. I did. They took my son-in-law out through the main doors first. My daughter went a minute later, still talking, still explaining, addressing a federal agent who had heard every version of this story before. The grand ballroom, which had been a gathering place for the best work I had ever done, became very quiet in a matter of seconds. I found my granddaughter near the back wall, sitting on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, and her eyes fixed on some middle distance only she could see. I sat down on the floor beside her. There were chairs 10 feet away. Neither of us took them. She asked what happened now. I told her I did not know exactly. I said that was the honest answer. She asked if I would help her. I told her that depended on what she meant by help. If she meant a check, the answer was no. If she meant a genuine chance to earn her way, the answer was yes. I told her I had a position open at the foundation. Entry-level, real work, filing, phones, patient intake coordination, 20 hours a week at standard hourly pay. I told her I would make one call to the University of Kentucky's financial aid office explaining her changed family circumstances. The rest was hers to figure out. She looked at me sideways for a moment, reading my face to determine if I was serious. I was entirely serious. She said, okay. 8 months later, my daughter and her husband were sentenced in federal district court. The judge cited the sustained, calculated nature of the contractor fraud, alongside the elder financial abuse conviction, and sentenced them each to 14 years in federal prison. 14 years. They had taken that many from me. The symmetry was not lost on the courtroom or on me. I visited my son-in-law once, not out of obligation, and not for closure. I had already found that for myself. I went because I had one specific thing left to deliver. The visitation room at the federal facility smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. He sat down across the glass from me like a man who had forgotten how to carry his own weight. The expensive suit was gone. The calculation in his eyes had been replaced by something flat and worn. The expression of a person who has spent months reconciling who he believed himself to be with what he actually did. He thanked me for coming. He said it quietly, and I believe he meant it. Then he asked, also quietly, if there was any chance I might put some money on his commissary account. Just a little, just enough for basics. I reached into my breast pocket and took out a small white envelope I had prepared that morning. I slid it through the transaction slot at the bottom of the glass partition. He opened it carefully. Inside was a money order for $250, a single $20 bill, and a single $5, $275 exactly. He looked up at me, his mouth opened slightly. I held his gaze and said, "That's what you left me." I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of that building without looking back. Not out of anger. I was simply finished. My granddaughter graduated 2 springs later. I sat in the 3rd row of the Rupp Arena commencement ceremony in Lexington with a bag of peanut M&Ms in my jacket pocket. Harriet used to bring them to everything, and I watched her walk across that stage in her cap and gown. She had been accepted to 3 medical schools. She chose Vanderbilt, 20 minutes from the Dunmore Hub in Nashville, where she had spent the previous 2 years coordinating patient intake for uninsured families while carrying a full course load and paying her own rent. She found me in the crowd afterward, still in her regalia. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for connections or introductions or a head start. She stood in front of me and said, "Thank you for not rescuing me." I told her she was welcome. She is now in her 1st year of residency. She calls on Sunday afternoons. We argue about baseball teams and talk too long about healthcare policy in rural counties, which is the kind of conversation I look forward to every single week. The 275 clinics now operate in 31 counties. Last fiscal year, they served more than 40,000 patients who had no other access to primary care. The little yellow post-it note is framed and lit behind glass in the reception area of the Nashville clinic, visible from the waiting room. Patients ask about it sometimes. The staff tells them it is the Foundation's origin story. That is exactly what it is. I live in the same house on the same 3 acres outside of Cookeville. The porch still sags on the left side. The neighbor's cats still wander over most afternoons. I drive out to the county clinic on Tuesday mornings to see patients, and I drink too much coffee, and I go to bed when I am tired, and I wake up when I am rested, and that is exactly the life I chose. There is one thing I have learned, in all of it, that seems worth saying plainly. The people who discount you at your lowest moment are not seeing something real about you. They are showing you something real about themselves. When your own child hands you a post-it note and tells you to start fresh, she is not measuring your worth. She is revealing her own. The freedom comes when you understand the difference, and when you stop allowing the assessment of someone who threw you away to determine the size of the life you build next. Build anyway. Build bigger than they imagined possible. $275 bought me everything I have now. I would not change a single cent of it.